Good evening, good evening, everyone. Gordon Causey coming at you live and unscripted, as is almost always the case. And as is almost always the case, Candy, the Wonder Dog, shows up expecting her treat because she has trained me so well. I have it here. Uh, so we'll get Candy taken care of. Shake a paw, lay down. Speak. Oh, good bark. A good bark tonight. Here we go. So where are we? We are right now Monday, the 11th of March, 2025, very late in the evening, 10:40. It's now 10:45 on the dot. I see I've already had Eat Me, Brett Skinner, John 5. Uh, Lots of people filling up the chat. As you know, I love that. I'm sorry that I'm not using StreamYard right now. That's the software that I use for a lot of my lives now, just only starting in the last couple of weeks. The only thing is StreamYard, when you use the free version of their software, you're limited to 20 hours in a month. And I only have and my the month for me resets on March 25th. And so I only have about 5, 6 hours remaining. And my videos, which I tend to do frequently, several a week, can often go 1 and 2 hours. So I would burn through it very quickly. And I want to have StreamYard available to me, especially if I have a guest on, like I had David on, like I had my friend Jacques Lapierre on. And um, so I'm trying to be judicious in my use of it. When I started using it, I wasn't aware of the 20-hour limit. I would have been a little more judicious with it had I known that I was limited to 20 hours. So once March 25th comes on, I'll be using it more frequently. But there, to beat that word to death, judiciously, I'll be using it more judiciously. I'll be when I want to do a short video, I'll use just regular YouTube like I am tonight. Anyway, uh, just reading through the comments that are on here, and Eat Me, I just did a video talking about The Chosen. I don't think it was a particularly great video. I don't think I had anything really profound to say. The only thing is with that streaming show, I do recommend it. We watched episode 7 and 8 tonight, episode 7 and 8 of season 2. So we're about to embark our household on watching season 3, and I'm looking forward to it. But tonight I wanted to talk about the story that's another one of my favorite expressions. I have a lot of little favorite expressions that I use, and one of them is sucking the oxygen out of the room. And the looming trade war, trade dispute, frame it however you want, between Canada and the US, that is what is sucking all the proverbial oxygen out of the room right now. Today, I was just in a store called Dollar Tree. And as it turns out, Dollar Tree, I wasn't aware of the fact, but it's not surprising. Dollar Tree is an American owned store, like Walmart, like so many stores are American owned. And the cashier was similar to myself. I also work in a retail establishment. And the cashier, like myself, fed up with all the people, just everyone coming in, hyperventilating over whether a specific product was sourced from the United States or Canada. I related how I think it was on Monday. Just yesterday, I interacted with a gentleman who was wearing one of those hats that says, Canada, not for sale. And so I approached the gentleman and said that was the first time I'd actually seen someone wearing the hat. I'd seen it reported on the news. I said, "Do you mind checking the hat? I just want to see where it's made." And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, no problem. I never looked." He took the hat off, handed it to me, and I looked and I showed it to him. The tag, we've all seen it, made in China. And I handed it back to him. And I said, "I'm not surprised." And he said, "Well, I don't care so long as it's not made in the United States." And I let it go at that. But I'll tell you, we have something of a trade dispute looming between Canada and China, but no one's talking about it. The fact that they have imposed 100% tariffs, forget 25, the Chinese have imposed 100% tariffs on Canadian agricultural products, specifically one that's apparently going to have a major impact in provinces like Manitoba, is canola. Canola oil, I think, is specifically and apparently it's has the potential to wreak havoc in sectors of our agricultural economy, but no one cares. And the Chinese tariffs on our agricultural products are in response to Canada having placed tariffs on electronic vehicles coming from China into Canada. And I believe that the tariff that we have imposed on EVs, electronic vehicles, is likewise 100%. And my own personal opinion is that Canadians and our media, that is the trade dispute. That is where our focus should be, not on our friends to the south, the Americans. And incidentally, I think pretty much everyone here is Canadian, aside from Brett Skinner, who is from the great state of Wyoming, a border state. I'm not sure, does it border Saskatchewan or British Columbia or Alberta, or maybe it might touch more than one. I have a map here, or a globe. Sorry, Danny FE, but I do have a globe. So there's, yeah, it borders mostly Alberta, or pretty much entirely Alberta. Wyoming does. I'll put my globe back down. Let me read what is being written before I get into the meat of what I want to talk about tonight. Eat Me writes that Dollar Tree hasn't been a dollar store since the last 10 years. Well, it doesn't say $1. I bought some razors because my beard is getting a little unwieldy. I'm going to be hacking it down significantly. That's the way I operate. I let it grow out, then I shave it down to almost nothing and let it grow out again. But I do shave here, and I buy cheap razors. So I bought a couple packages of razors, 5 in each pack. I bought shaving cream. I bought some Werther's Originals, and my little guy, he got some candy. I think he got some Jolly Rancher type things. And the entire bill was $6 and some odd. It was $6 and change. So, for all those items, a few bucks. Dollar Tree works. Cryptomeria says that it should be called the Toonie tree or Toonie tree. For Americans wondering, the Canadian dollar, we don't have a paper $1 bill anymore. And so it has been replaced by this little coin. And it has on it, see if I can get a decent representation, hold up to the camera. I don't know how well you can see that, but that is a loon, which is a duck-like creature. And so our dollar is often referred to as a loonie. And I've got one. We had a $2 bill that was widely circulated and because we called the one a loonie, we called the two a toonie, although I like the toonie better. It's got the representation of a polar bear on it. I think it's a prettier version. And as a matter of fact, there's a town just north of me called Campbellford, Ontario, where the individual who designed the artwork on the $2 coin, he's from there. And so on the Trent River, which bisects Campbellford, there's a large, not statue, but a large toonie coin mounted. It's got to be, I don't know, 25, 35, 40 feet high, something like that. Anyway, so let me catch up with what's being said. John 5 is asking if Trudeau tariffed China last year. They're constantly thinking you can't keep up. Well, I certainly can't keep up with everything that happens in respect to trade relations between Canada and China, Canada and the European Union, China and Canada and Mexico and the United States. These little things, they have something called the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and they're quite often disputes that everything is taken to World Trade Organization, and then these disputes are adjudicated. But then it's up to individual countries whether they are going to abide by the decisions of the WTO. And with Trump in the White House, you have to wonder, if he didn't get a favorable ruling, or the ruling that he thinks they should get, would he abide by the decision? That's an open question. I suspect there's a strong chance that Trump would not. Eat Me is writing, pretty much. Brett is saying, do you think Canada is the problem? Why the tariffs, or other countries? No real answer, because you nor I can do anything about it. Bit of a convoluted sentence. You write the way I do. Do I think Canada's the problem? Are we the reason behind the tariffs? I think what has happened in the US, I'll fixate, we got to stick industry specific, uh, especially with the news, the way it's unfolding. Things have been happening almost hourly today, just on Monday, the 11th. Things were changing seemingly every few minutes, every few hours. Uh, and focusing specifically on aluminum and steel. Canada on when, I believe it's on when, actually tomorrow, Tuesday or Wednesday. I think it's the 12th. I think it's tomorrow. That's when 25% tariffs, specifically on aluminum and steel, were poised to go into effect. And why is that? Why aluminum and steel, and why on Canada? Canada is a major supplier of steel and aluminum products to the United States of America. One of the reasons why our steel and aluminum is attractive is because our dollar is only 60 cents compared to the American dollar, give or take. Might be a little under 60 cents, a little over. It fluctuates, obviously. But that gives us an enormous advantage. Canadian workers are paid in Canadian dollars. Our steel is produced in Canadian dollars. So Americans come in and their dollar buys so much more. And so it gives us a competitive advantage. And that hurts the US steel industry, because you got a building project? Are you going to source the steel from a US manufacturer, or are you going to get it from Hamilton? That's a major steel producing city in Ontario, Canada. Or get it from Hamilton, where it's significantly cheaper. You're going to go where it's cheap. And so by putting a 25% tariff on imported steel, it will encourage a company building a huge skyscraper. Well, let's get our steel from Pennsylvania. Let's not get it from Hamilton. It's too expensive to get it from Hamilton. And that could be the reason I believe Trump is doing this, is to revive the US steel industry. The US still has a steel industry, but it is nothing like it was back in the 70s and early 80s. It's after the US and Canada and Mexico, after we entered into these free trade agreements, that so much of the, you know, heavy industries like steel and aluminum have vacated to other countries. Likewise, manufacturing. So many of the cars that we drive now are produced down in Mexico, because labor is so much cheaper down there. Employment standards are lower. They don't have the same wages, benefits that North American workers get. So the car can be produced much cheaper down there. And for the GMs, Fords, Chryslers of the world, whatever jurisdiction will be cheapest, that's where you're going to place your production. And if you can import your product into the United States or into Canada freely, free trade, bring it in, well, that's going to impact jobs in Canada and the US. I'm just going to keep reading before I try and get on to my central point. So I read Brett Skinner's. I have John 5 saying, it seems CBC is trying to say China tariffs us because of USA. That is entirely possible. I do think there is the potential that China is trying to drive a wedge between Canada and the US. I think that's very much a strong possibility. Ultimately, I'm going to say this: Canada should not be cozying up to the Chinese Communist Party. And newsflash for Brett Skinner, Americans may not be aware of this, and some Canadians may not be as aware of it as well. The fact that there has been proven electoral interference in our democracy in Canada by Chinese nationals. What has happened is in Canada, we're probably weeks away, a month or so away from a federal election. And there are 343 ridings in Canada. It used to be 338, now it's expanding to 343. And each party, each of the major parties will have what is termed as an EDA, an electoral district association. I prefer to call it a riding association. It's just easier to say. So the Liberals have a riding association in every riding. So do the Conservatives, so do the NDP. The Green is pretty much everywhere too. And the PPC likewise, in just about every riding, they have a riding association. And then it's up to the riding association to hold a nomination process and put forth a candidate for a federal election. And what has happened, documented by CSIS and the RCMP, is that Chinese nationals have flooded into specific ridings in Canada to ensure the nomination of specific candidates, quite often candidates who are ethnically Chinese. And you have to wonder, to whom are these candidates beholden? Because Canadians, by and large, we do not vote for the local candidate. We vote based on party affiliation. Canadians are right now trying to decide between Mark Carney and his Liberal Party in an upcoming election and Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. But when Canadians go to the ballot box, when they get their ballot, neither the name Mark Carney nor the name Pierre Poilievre will be on the ballot. When I go to cast my vote, I will be handed a ballot. It will have a Liberal, a Conservative, an NDP, a Green, a PPC, and maybe a couple other names. But there will be those 5 names as well, most certainly. And each of those 5 names will list a party. So if I want Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to form the next government, I'm going to put my X next to the name for my riding. The gentleman's name is Philip Lawrence. He's the Conservative running in this riding. So I will put an X beside his name. Am I voting for Philip Lawrence? Ultimately, yes, I am. I am voting that he will be the representative for the riding I live in, called Northumberland Peterborough South. That's the name it used to have. It probably has a new name now because the boundaries have changed a little. And I'm voting to have him be this riding's representative in Ottawa. But then at the end of the day, what happens is whichever party has the most seats in our House of Commons, that party forms the government, and whoever that party's leader happens to be becomes the prime minister. So if the Conservatives manage to win the most seats, then they become the governing party, and Pierre Poilievre becomes Prime Minister of Canada. But what the point I'm trying to make is that most Canadians, we're not voting for our local candidates. The decision is based on the national level. Who do you want to be prime minister? Do you want it to be Mark Carney? You vote for a Liberal candidate. Do you want Pierre Poilievre? Then you vote for a Conservative candidate. If you want Jagmeet Singh to be prime minister of Canada, you put an X beside the NDP candidate. I have Brett Skinner writing, LOL, Wyoming, no border state, but looks up USA states. So I thought, I've been through Wyoming, and I thought it was, we went from Portland, Oregon up to Washington through that little tip of Iowa. And then we have Montana. Oh, that is all Montana. Wyoming is south of Montana. Very good. Yes. So it doesn't border. My bad. Shows you I just failed geography 101. Yeah. We trekked down from Montana, went down through Wyoming and then through South Dakota. The reason we went to South Dakota is my parents were bent. They wanted to see Mount Rushmore, Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson, and Theodore Roosevelt, I think, are the 4 faces on that. And I saw that famous monument. And I also saw the very early renderings of Crazy Horse. And that, gosh, this is going back, coming up on 50 years ago. And that Crazy Horse monument has hardly changed from the time that I saw it 40 plus years ago. So let me read. Yeah, so sorry. Thank you for the geography lesson. And I can't believe I've been through, mind you, that was the summer I was turning 12. So I'll give myself a pass, even if no one else will. John is writing that China has a long memory, and so do we. Brett Skinner is writing, our dollar is loony as well, and definitely not worth the value of toilet paper. All the world's currencies are fiat currencies. They're based on supply and demand. And I'm going to dive right into something of a thesis statement, something of the, this is the subject of the video, is the fact that, and I've said it many times before, is that the US is the preeminent military and economic power in the world. And that's been the case since the end of World War II. Prior to the Americans, the preeminent, economic military power in the world, for a very long time, it had been the British. The Great Britain and their British Empire were the predominating military and economic power in the world. The sun never sets on the British Empire. They had land holdings in Hong Kong, throughout the Far East, India, South America, Central America, Canada. The sun never set on the British Empire. And at this time, America was the rising power. And where I would say the baton was passed from the Brits to the Americans was at the conclusion of World War I. World War II, not the First World War, but the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, the United States of America very much was the world's predominating military and economic power. And it was a peaceful transition because Britain and the United States were very closely allied, and there was the emerging threat of the old Soviet Union. Russia and her Soviet Socialist Republics, that's what USSR stood for, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Russia very much is the centerpiece. And then they had their Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, all these regions within Russia. And then they had their satellites. And their satellites included East Germany. Ironically, the official name for East Germany was the DDR, which was the Deutsches Demokratische Republik. Pardon my German, it's not good, but they were called the Democratic Republic of Germany. That was the term we in the West would call it East Germany. The Soviet side of the old Iron Curtain, they called it the German Democratic Republic, DDR. And so Poland and Hungary, they had their sphere and we had our sphere, and they were in competition with each other. And so there was a smooth transition between Britain being the world's dominant power, and they passed the baton very gently over to the Americans. Americans took it over, and we entered the era of Pax Americana, and very closely allied. And the world was binary. It was a choice between, two dominating powers, the Soviets and the Americans. And then as the 80s drew to a close and we entered the early 90s, I forget the specific dates. That's a lot of people have trouble with history. What they hate about history is trying to learn all the dates, and I don't get them 100% right. So I don't try, just try and get the general area. Late 80s, early 90s is when the old Soviet Union imploded on itself. We had in the years that followed, we saw the emergence of countries within that previously had never existed, that were part of the old Soviet system, and before that had been part of the old Tsarist Russian system, like Ukraine, like the Baltic states of Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. They suddenly became independent nation states. And as the old Soviet Union collapsed on itself, we entered an era of economic prosperity. Bill Clinton was the president of the United States. The economy was booming. The stock market was booming. Unemployment was at record lows. As a matter of fact, I haven't checked on this, but I do believe that things were so good that the Americans had a balanced budget. So the economy was going gangbusters. And a lot of people were equating it to, they called it the peace dividend. Now that the biggest enemy, the biggest adversary of the Americans had been defeated, now there wasn't as much need for military spending anymore. They no longer had that major adversarial force to worry about. Under Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev, the old Soviet Union had collapsed. Reagan's famous pronouncement at the Berlin Wall, Mr. Gorbachev, take this wall down. We saw the reunification of Germany, the reemergence of the German economic powerhouse came back into being as East Germany and West Germany reunited. Wonderful time. And at that time, China was just a place where cheap knockoff goods would be produced, things like hats. This hat, this make Trudeau a drama teacher again, somewhat the Canadian version of the MAGA hat. But where is it made? There you go, made in China. Right? And just like that guy's hat that said Canada not for sale, made in China. And they weren't really an economic threat. But as we entered into as the 90s rolled on and we entered into the 2000s, Jean Chrétien, former very popular winner of 3 consecutive majority governments, liberal governments, Jean Chrétien, his government started to lead teams of individuals going over to China and other Far Eastern nations. Team Canada would roll into China and Thailand and Malaysia and Bangladesh, go to these Far Eastern nations, principally among them China. And it was Chrétien, members of his cabinet, Minister of Finance, Minister of Trade and Development, those types of individuals, as well as bureaucrats and industry leaders, business leaders. And they rolled in and they would come back and announce, we've just signed deals totaling $8 billion, $10 billion, $3 billion. And prosperity is coming to Canada because we're increasing our economic relationship with Chinese and other Far Eastern nations. Rah, Canada, all is good. And China has been climbing. And it has long been projected that sometime between the year 2030 and 2035, that the Chinese economy it has been forecasted to surpass that of the United States, and that China will be the world's preeminent economic power. And then we have a fly in the ointment. We have the Americans have twice now elected Donald Trump, once back in 2016 and then again just now in 2024. And Donald Trump is kind of sticking a monkey wrench in the works and trying to repatriate high-paying industrial jobs, manufacturing jobs, steel industry jobs to his own country. And I openly wonder how much of an influence do the Chinese have over my native country's government, and also even over the United States. Do the Chinese have operatives? Do they have a fifth column operating within what Donald Trump refers to as the deep state, unelected bureaucratic officials who do a lot of the work of government? And are there individuals in there who are beholden to China? And I would fall off my chair if there were not. Corporate espionage and government espionage is de rigueur. It is to be expected. How does that impact individuals such as myself? I think that ultimately what has to happen is my native Canada, we have to decide, are we going to cozy up to the Chinese, or are we going to stay strong with our American friends? And just by the way I stated that, you can tell where my sympathies lie. We need to stand strong with our American friends. And stop whining about if we want to be a sovereign nation, well, then we cannot complain when an equally sovereign nation wants to promote its own industry, like steel and aluminum. If Donald Trump wants to put a 25% tariff to build up his steel and aluminum industry, the American steel and aluminum industry, well, that's the right of the American government. It is a foreign country. We are not the 51st state. We do not have an inalienable right to sell our steel and aluminum products or anything else into their country. We pretty much have put a steel fence around our dairy sector because of supply side management. We have this communistic supply side management, basically making dairy something of a cartel, like the OPEC cartel, like the cocaine cartels that fix prices. We have that here in Canada, and we don't want to give up our supply side management, which is very communistic in orientation, and we refuse to negotiate on it. And I don't think Donald Trump takes too kindly to it. Likewise, in our banking sector, where we say to American banks, well, you can open a branch in Canada if you want. You want to open a subsidiary branch in downtown Toronto? Well, you can, but our Banking Act is not going to allow you to have any customers that cannot leave at least 150,000 on deposit. So an American bank deciding to set up shop in Canada has to refuse any client who doesn't have at least $150,000 they can leave on deposit, which effectively shuts American banks out of the lucrative retail banking sector. They can still open up their little boutique shops, offer boutique services, but mortgages, lines of credits, probably close to $1 trillion industry just in Canada. And well, sorry, Americans, you can't compete in that against the big five Canadian banks and even the smaller ones like Laurentian and National Bank and what have you. Let's read what's being written. I got a few things, a couple things being written. EME is writing, wouldn't look good for the electronic vehicle Canadian narrative, having cars exploding at charging stations. I'm not an EV fan. I'm not a fan. The mining of the batteries, the lithium and other chemical components, mineral components, cobalt, everything that goes into these batteries, it relies a lot on child slave labor. Eat Me is further writing, Cheesecake Ford is to travel to DC to make his point. And Eat Me is further writing that there's no OSHA, Standards Health Administration, Organization of Standardized Health, or I forget what OSHA stands for, but it's basically regulatory body establishing employment safety standards. And Eat Me is writing, she meant to say the Chinese electronic vehicles. It's all right. Don't worry about typos and that. And I just realized I'm not on. Oh, yeah, I am on live chat. I was not on top chat. Good. So it looks like I've caught up with everything in the live chat. So I had a thought and I'm going to try and bring it back. This is what happens when you get older. You get sidetracked and you can't find your way back to the point you were originally trying to make. Had to do with, so how have things been unfolding in this, changing every few minutes, every few hours, there's a new story out. So Canada was set to have 25% tariffs imposed on our steel and aluminum, and that was to start tomorrow or Wednesday. I think it's actually, I think it's the 11th. Sorry, the 12th. I think it's the 12th. I think it's supposed to start tomorrow, but I may be a day off. These 25% tariffs were to go into effect. So what Doug Ford did is he announced that Ontario was going to be imposing a 25% levy surcharge on electricity going from Ontario into three border states, Minnesota, Michigan, and New York State. I have the three right. I was saying Vermont before. But I was saying I wasn't sure. It's not Vermont. The three states are Minnesota, Michigan, and New York State. And he was going to be charging 25% more, putting a levy, a surcharge, not a tariff, because a tariff affects products coming into your country. A levy affects products, things like electricity going out of your country. And so the response of the Trump administration to that 25% increased cost on American consumers for their electricity was to say, all right, and it was now going to be 50% tariffs on aluminum and steel. And then Ford further came back and said, all right, I'll shut it off completely. And we were getting into, and pardon the expression, but I'm going to use it. This is a little coarse, a little profane, but it was a dick waving contest between Ford and the Trump administration. We're going to put 25% tariff on your steel and aluminum. Oh, yeah? Well, put 25% in your electricity. Oh, yeah? Well, 25% steel and aluminum is now going to 50%. Then Ford, well, I won't sell you any electricity. I'll block it. You can all freeze in the dark. And then what happened, the story that is being promoted in the media is that cooler heads have prevailed. There, and I can't remember the name of the U.S. Commerce Secretary. I've heard it so many times now. Whatever the guy's name is. Ford is claiming that the Commerce Secretary reached out to him. I believe the Commerce Secretary is saying that Ford is the one who called who knows. One called the other. And it's been determined that Ford will go down to Washington, D.C., meet with this individual, and perhaps they'll be able to negotiate something out. We shall see. Am I hopeful? I'm 50-50. I don't know. I think Trump is hell-bent. He wants free and fair access to the banking sector so that a U.S. subsidiary bank can come and open up a branch in Canada if it wants and compete fairly with Canadian banks. And Canadians are elbows up, sticking out. No, you're not bringing your banks in here. We're going to continue to protect, and we're going to put a wall around our dairy sector. Apparently, that led to some profanity when Trudeau spoke with Trump, the dairy sector in particular, because Canada has an effective wall around importing American dairy products into our country, into my country. And man, this is going to be, it's not a good time. And we're distracted with each other. Meanwhile, the Chinese are climbing, and that is, we're getting into geopolitics. We're getting into the Belt Road Initiative. We're getting into BRICS. We're getting into a period of time in history where the political infrastructure is shifting, the power base is shifting eastward from the United States to China. Will Trump be able to halt that this transfer? At the end of World War II, when this baton was passed from the British to the Americans, it was a peaceful passing of the baton. I don't think, as China emerges as the world's dominant economic player, I don't think it's going to be peaceful. And I don't think they are going to be thrilled with the thought of US doing things to forestall or prevent them from taking the top spot. They want to be number one in the world, militarily and economically. And it helps them that the US is a consumer of goods, but not a producer of goods. They don't make their own steel. They import a lot, but they don't make it. They drive a lot of cars, but probably, I don't know the numbers, but a lot of those cars are imported from Mexico and overseas. If you want to be a strong economy, you need people working in those industries, and not everyone has a post-secondary education. There are some jobs you need to have employment for those individuals who only have high school or maybe not even high school. Jobs like that used to exist in the manufacturing sector, working on an assembly line, making cars. There's so much happening in the world right now. We've got so much automation, so much digitalization, so too many multisyllabic words, too much AI, artificial intelligence, taking jobs away from human beings. If you listen to the World Economic Forum, the greater slice of humanity is being referred to as a bunch of useless eaters who will simply have to be placated for a time with video games, drugs, and junk food. Scary times that the world is entering into. Danny has shown up with the praying hands and the cross. God bless you, sir. And that is why a constant theme on this channel, and I should bring it up more, but I recognize the fact that for a lot of people, they are very adversarial toward any content that has even religious undertones, because religion, there's a lot wrong with religion, and that's just reality. There's a lot wrong with the world. Anything that human beings get their hands on, we mess it up ultimately. Look at what we do with human health. Look at what we do with human health. So often we think we're improving things, but we're not. Look at atrazine. Atrazine is a commonly used herbicide in the United States and Canada. Herbicide or pesticide. I actually don't know the difference. What's the difference between a herbicide and a pesticide? Probably a herbicide is more broad-based and a pesticide is more specifically focused on things like gnats and pests. Anyway, I think atrazine is probably more accurately described as a herbicide. It's sprayed all over on crops, and it's banned in the European Union or in many countries across Europe, and I think the whole European Union, because they tend to act as a bloc. Well, why is atrazine banned in Europe, but here it's used widely? And I would invite you to look into studies that have been done that have shown what effect atrazine has on African bullfrogs, what it does to them. What the studies have shown is that African bullfrogs exposed to atrazine, that a percentage of the male African frogs exposed to atrazine become either sterilized or they actually flip gender and they go from being male to female and actually produce viable eggs. So the question then begs, okay, if that's what they do to an amphibian, what do they do to a mammal? What do they do to humans? What do the tests say that they do to mice and rats? And after testing mice and rats, let's test it on humans. Well, as far as I'm aware, and I have looked, there have been no tests done on even mice. And it's further my understanding that in medical science, when an event is, pardon my cough. That's one thing I like. I like coughing because I think it speaks to the fact that I'm not an AI bot. I've yet to see an artificial intelligence bot, and I've seen a number of them. I've yet to see one cough or drink coffee. I'm real, live and unscripted. My slip ups, my linguistic little faux pas should speak to the fact that I'm real. If I was going to be an AI, if I was going to use AI to generate my content, I'd be perfect. And I'm far from it. Let's see what's being written. Danny's saying hi to everyone. Everyone's saying hi back and forth. And Danny's writing that Cal herbicide used to kill broadleaf weeds and some grasses, primarily used on farms, but can also be used on lawns and golf courses. I think you're talking about Roundup, perhaps. Yeah, and it's unreal. The herbicides, pesticides, the chemicals that are banned often in other countries, but are in use in Canada and the US. And anyway, what I was talking about atrazine, I'm not aware of any studies that have been done on mice, rats, mammals. And I've come to understand that when medical science views something in an animal population, that it is then assumed to impact humans in like manner, unless or until a study is done on humans that proves otherwise. So if you see a negative adverse event in mice, then the standard operating procedure has been to assume, okay, if it happened in mice, then we're going to assume it's going to happen in humans unless or until a human study is done and it contradicts what we saw in the mice. And as far as I'm aware, and I have looked, I have not found any studies done on atrazine involving rats, mice, any mammalian type species, lemurs, who knows. Um, Let me read what's being read. And Danny's saying, wait, what? You're not a highly advanced AI bot? I think that should be fairly obvious. How many AI bots cough and make so many, I think they're called malapropisms, where you mean to say one word and you say the other one. I do that a lot. The other day, I rewatched a video I did, and I was talking about the fact that I had played hockey in Portland, Oregon when I lived there. And just about everyone I played on the team with and in the league, I think there was like, I think there were like four teams, you know, four full teams with, 15 to 20 players each. And all the kids on my team, they were all either Canadian born or they were born to Canadian parents. But when I said it the other day, I said they were either Canadians themselves or born to Americans. I meant to say Canadians, and I do that a lot. What happens is your brain operates faster than your mouth does. Anyway, so the takeaway from this, the ultimate fine point I'm going to put on this, is that our major concern should be with Chinese interference in our economy, in our politics, and we should be less fixated on the United States. We should recognize that the United States is a foreign country, and we do not have the inherent right to sell our goods, products, services into the United States. They have the right to impose protectionist measures if they want. If we want to have free and unfettered access to the American market, well, there is something we can do. We could petition to become the 51st state. If we do not want to be the 51st state, then we should be pursuing economic relations with other countries. We should be seeking to increase trade broadly. We should diversify. We should be seeking out trading partners in Mexico, in the Caribbean, in Europe, in the Far East. We should spread ourselves out. And likewise, we should lower interprovincial trade barriers. It's easier for a lot of companies to sell their products into the United States than it is to sell to the province right next door. It's crazy the way, and I get that. The US market is 10 more, the economy is more than 10 times bigger than that of Canada. So if you're producing, I don't know, whatever product you're producing, I don't know, handmade dream catchers, whatever it is. Do you want access to the American market or the Manitoba market or the Quebec market? You want access to the American market. So we've put all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. And now that the Americans have decided to, try and revive certain industry groups like steel and aluminum, we'll see what happens. But I think in the coming years, I'm going to end this off by reading what I wrote on my Facebook timeline. And it's repetitive, a lot of it's repetitive with what I said, but sometimes I can get my thoughts out better in the written form than the spoken form. The title of it is Canada is for Sale. It's just a question of to whom. And I reiterate, it was just yesterday that someone showed me their Canada Not for Sale ball cap. I'd asked the gentleman wearing it if I could check to see where it was made. He agreed, and I was not surprised to see a tag with the all too familiar words "Made in China." The gentleman who owns the hat, he brushed it off, saying, "No, so long as it's not made in the United States." So it's fine if a product that could be made in Canada comes from a foreign nation, so long as that foreign nation isn't the United States. Ugh. The world is evolving constantly, and that much is obvious. But we are nearing what I consider to be an inflection point. But I'm not going to be making any predictions. I'm not going to say how long it takes before the clock hits midnight. It might be months, it could be years. But we are moving toward 0 hour, faster and faster. Now, and then I go into, at the end of the Second World War, the baton was passed from the British to the Americans, with the United States emerging as the dominant economic and military force in the world. And it was a smooth transition because the US and Great Britain became strong allies in order to confront the emerging power and influence of the old Soviet Union. And then for the next 40 or so years, the battle to be the dominant global power was between Western democracies led by the US against the dictatorial communist system led by Russia and its union of Soviet socialist republics and Eastern European satellites. And that battle ended as we entered the 90s with the collapse of the old Soviet Union. Coincidentally, it coincided with a period of enormous economic prosperity. What I was talking about, the peace dividend, they were calling it. But since the early 2000s, a new power has been rising, the Chinese, and Canada has been abetting that rise by establishing and strengthening the economic relationship between China and Canada. And then I wrote about, John Chrétien, when he was prime minister, he traveled to China and other Eastern nations, team of government officials, business leaders, negotiating ever increasing levels of economic agreement and trade relations. Um, and then it has long been predicted that the Chinese would supplant the Americans as the world's largest market sometime around 2030 to 2035. However, there are now some economists who are pushing that date further back into the future, or some are saying it may never happen at all. The US may stay on top. And the reason they're thinking the US might be able to maintain its dominant position, it's due to the fact that it's due to the potential that Americans might be able to revive their industrial base and once again be a country that produces things rather than just buying them. And therein lies the crux of the current conflict unfolding between Canada and the United States. And I wrote that I will have more to say on this in the future because the news is changing hourly and it's hard to keep up. But ultimately, I think Canada is going to have to decide between the US and China. That's my, bottom line take on the situation. And up until now, we've been trying to cozy up to both. We want to be friends with the Americans and friends with the Chinese. Well, we're coming to a point where we're going to have to make a choice. Is it going to be Canada, or is it going to be China, or is it going to be the United States? And I do not want my country aligning itself with a communist dictatorial country. I don't think the business sector gives a rat. They don't give a rat's rosy rear end. They see the Chinese as the way to go because of their basic dictatorship, and you can steamroll things through, and to heck with human rights and to heck with democracy, and all they're interested in is the bottom line, and they'll be operating. They're going to be rich, powerful, and wealthy regardless of whether it's in the communist system. China is producing more millionaires, billionaires there than anywhere in the world. Their stock markets are roaring. They're doing very well. And when you're powerful, wealthy, influential, who cares which system is going to allow me to increase my power, my wealth, my influence? And a lot of people like the Chinese model. A lot of people in that strata, a lot of people with their hands on the economic levers like the Chinese system better than our having to worry about things like human rights and civil rights and free speech. We are in trouble. Danny's writing, we're Chinese owned, thanks to Justin and his admiration for the way the Chinese can get things done and turn things around on a dime, which is what Justin said all the way back in 2015, that he has admiration for the Chinese and their basic dictatorship. And I'm convinced that there has been Chinese infiltration in our democracy, in the halls of power in Ottawa and in Washington too. So Danny's writing that the pendulum must swing back at some point. It will. It will. Unfortunately, I would most like to avoid a situation where there's violent revolution. Unfortunately, quite often when a pendulum gets going, the only thing that pushes it back is military conflict, is revolution, is, and those are not good times. And Danny's saying if you try to please everyone, you please no one. Eventually, we're going to have to decide. The U.S. and the U.S. and China are on something of a collision course there, and it's going to come to a head. And when it does, Canada, whose side are you on? There's a great song. Check that out sometime. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Check out the Pete Seeger version about the coal mining, the efforts to unionize coal mines in Kentucky. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? That's coming for Canada. We're gonna have to decide. Are we gonna stand shoulder to shoulder with our American friends? And ultimately, and this type of conflict is global because of the Belt Road Initiative, where China has been going into places like Greenland and Africa, locking up a lot of precious minerals and natural resources vital to a growing economy. The US and China are on a collision course. And had Biden's, or rather Kamala Harris, but had that Kamala Harris won, I think we would have seen that transition continuing. And I think it would have possibly even been peaceful. The United States, Canada, the world would just turn more communist in orientation, guided by the WEF. And now some orange guy in the United States, and I don't think he's doing it perfectly, but he's gumming up the works. He is gumming up the works. I think they have players, though, who are in the Trump camp. I think in the MAGA camp, there are provocateurs, that there are agents, fifth column, Trojan horse type individuals within the Trump administration itself. And I'm not ready at this point to say who specifically, although my number one candidate would have the initials EM. Figure that out. And then Danny's writing that the Chinese are major landowners in the US, and look at us, look at Vancouver. But anyway, I'm going to end it there at just over an hour, or just under an hour, or right around an hour. However, I always ramble on. I'm like the pastor at church who says, okay, and in conclusion, and then 5 minutes later says, to wrap things up, and then 5 minutes after that says, and my final point. And I'm guilty as charged. I do that all the time. Danny's writing, Jesus is king. Danny knows what's coming. So does Eat Me. So does Brett. So does anyone still watching at this point. I like to give a blessing at the end of my videos because ultimately what's happening in the world is secondary to the relationship that each of us makes with the ultimate power in this world, the ultimate power in the universe, if you like, the creator of all things. And there's a blessing at the end of the book of Numbers where Aaron speaks over God's covenant chosen people, and you can be part of God's covenant chosen people. God came down. Didn't want heaven without us. So Jesus, you brought heaven down to us so that we can experience it here in the very core of our being, called the heart, if you like. And the blessing is this: may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and lift up his countenance upon you. And may the Lord be gracious to you and grant you peace. And he will. And all this that I'm talking about, trade relations and everything, heaven and earth will pass away. But the word will not pass away. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and Jesus was there at the beginning. I'm reading from or I'm reciting from the opening of the Gospel according to John, if you want to read it. I invite everyone to read it. And I invite you, if you're into the streaming stuff and you like the streaming shows and you like to binge watch things, I highly recommend, especially if Christianity, if Jesus Christ, who was this guy who turned the world upside down? Who is he? Who's this guy who, by being crucified, dying, and rising again on the third day, how did this guy turn the world absolutely upside down? We date time by Jesus's incarnation into the world. Anno Domini, AD, the year of our Lord. That's Anno Domini is Latin. BC, before Christ. I know that it's popular in scholarly circles to refer to the year 2025. This is of the Common Era. Anything after what we used to call AD, they say, no, it's Common Era. And I go, well, a better use of that acronym CE would be Christian Era, because there's nothing that the year I'm living right now, 2025, has very little in common with the year 300, 400, 500, 1000, 1200, 1700. What do we have in common with those eras? Very precious little, except for one thing: Christ. The Christian era. Call it the Christian era, call it the year of our Lord, call it whichever you like. So either before the Christian era or after, but Jesus changed the world, and he's still changing the world. He's still alive. He's still active. He lives on in the hearts of men who seek him, and he's got his hand out to you. So I'm going to end it there. God bless, and we'll see you all tomorrow. I'll probably do it tomorrow on StreamYard. Use up a few of my 5-6 hours that I have left on that, using that streaming software. I like it. I like being able to populate the comments to the screen. I think that's a lot more, it improves the engagement. I think people like to be able to see their comment up there, because then I can ensure that I'm not misrepresenting what they're saying. Not that I would, but I can make mistakes. So anyway, I'm rambling now. God bless, and we'll see you all, if not tomorrow, in a night or two. Good night.